What are the ramifications of President Trump's and the Pentagon's war on Iran? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners.
All right, Richard. So we have another undeclared war of aggression on the part of the U.S. government, this one led by President Trump against Iran and the people of Iran. Massive conflagration, much bigger than what they did over in Venezuela. And we've had an array of shifting rationales from they they were coming to get us. The Ayatollah was going to fire ballistic missiles at the United States, and they needed to preempt them. Or he was developing WNDs, which is sort of a variation of it on the invasion of Iraq theme. They want to help the Iraqi people. I mean, the Iranian people with this regime change. They love democracy. All this shifting array. Nobody really knows. In this week's Trump Watch, I gave my thesis. I think it's what the Roman emperors used to do whenever there was a rebellion afoot within the Roman citizenry over out of control spending and taxation and inflation. They would start up a foreign war against some new official enemy to distract attention and get people to rally around the flag. And the big subject up till recently was Jeffrey Epstein. I think there's a very good possibility that Epstein was a part of intelligence. That's what the U.S. attorney had heard. They gave him the sweetheart plea bargain. And intelligence could mean the Mossad or the CIA, or more likely both. And that's my thesis, is this is a war to get that Epstein possible connection to intelligence, U.S. intelligence or Israeli intelligence off the front page. But regardless of what the rationale is, Richard, it's still part of this same syndrome that you and I have been addressing for 36 years here at FFF and elsewhere. Uh, this idea that the role of the U.S. government should serve as a world's policeman, as a regime changer, sanctions, embargoes, that has brought so much death and destruction, coups, state-sponsored assassinations. Martin Luther King, in the midst of the Vietnam intervention, called this the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, the U.S. government. And nothing's changed. I mean, look at the violence that's taking place now in Iran and really all over the Middle East. Uh, it's just the same old mindset that constitutes really an abandonment of the founding principles of this country. War is the health of the state. And unfortunately, all too many Americans continue to buy into this mindset, this principle of foreign interventionism that John Quincy Adams had warned against. He says, if you go down this road, which Americans did not go down this road through most of the first 100 years of American history, Adams says, if you go down this road, your nation's gonna be like a dictator. And who can deny that the U.S. is like a dictator? Not to mention the fact that it destroys the liberty and the spirit of well-being, of harmony, of peace, prosperity of the citizenry themselves, of the American people. And we've seen this time and time again: World War I, World War II, the Spanish-American War, Vietnam, Korea, just on and on. And it's amazing, Richard, that Americans do not question this paradigm. They don't question the national security state paradigm. They don't question the paradigm of foreign interventionism, despite the fact that you can just see what's happening in this country. Out of control federal spending. The debt is what, in excess of 38 trillion, somewhere around there. Uh, you've got massive debasement of the currency, decade after decade. You've got high taxation. Uh, when will people finally realize, Richard, that what we've been saying for 36 years at FFF is the way to go? Remember our book, the failure of America's foreign wars. I mean, That's a timeless book that we published back in the 90s. Uh, what's it going to take, Richard, to move this country in a different direction?
Well, I think that we should recognize that not everybody is enthusiastic about this war. Following the news, like many of our viewers and listeners have, they've been already over the last few days having public opinion polls. Of course, a large number of Republicans just think that Trump is right and this is necessary. But obviously, Democrats don't. And a large number of independents think that this is an unjustifiable use of force, that they're concerned about a war that has no end again. Um, they worry about the cost of these things in human lives. So Trump has undertaken this thing with no massive groundswell of support by the American citizenry, at least as reflected in these polls. Even Republicans, uh, a sizable number of them are wondering about how long this war could go on and what his will consequences will be. Since, as you say, what is the rationale? But while people have talked about, well, what if the administration is wrong, and the Iranians keep having the ability to lob missiles and drones at us and these neighboring countries, and uh, we can't break them, and are we going to do ground troops and so on? I would like to suggest that an equally troublesome question is, what if we win? What if we win this war? What if we break the back of the Iranian revolutionary forces, the, the military itself, uh, uh, decapitate enough of the leadership through these precision bombings? And there's no doubt about that. Both we and the Israelis are unbelievably savvy in this intelligence gathering to do this. Um, and what if they find some variation on the theme of what's happened in Venezuela? That they find some third level leadership left that is willing to cut a deal with the United States, cut the rhetoric, not attempt to reactivate the nuclear testing and potential bomb making, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What if we win? I would suggest that that's as dangerous uh, as other people feel that losing would be. Why? Because if Trump wins, the euphoria that this is the new template to guarantee and continue American foreign interventionism will then run roughshod, not only for him, but when he leaves office, for the next and the next predecessor, follower who takes the White House, either Republican or Democrat. The idea that using force this way, intimidation this way, fear this way, can bend the rest of the world and any number of countries in it to what America ever wants. In other words, this is the right path and the right methods and the right goals and purposes that should guide American foreign policy. So I think that a victory in terms of the institutional direction which interventionism has guided us so far will merely be reinforced and would take us down more further roads like this, looking to the future. Because if you can beat Iran, well, why can't you intervene and change the course of events in country Y and country Z and country X? And what if you then finally say, well, if we could do it against Iran and these other countries, what happens if China invades Taiwan? Well, if we can knock out the leadership of Iran, what if we can knock out the senior leadership of China and beat China to our will? See, what's the end of it if it succeeds? So I think that it's as dangerous a possibility as we win as if, in the eyes of some, if we lose.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And in fact, I think that his so-called success in Venezuela was part of the impetus for him shifting his armada to the Middle East and saying,
Right.
oh, if I can do it there, I'll do it here. And I think that they thought that, oh, they could just knock out this leadership and have the masses, the pro-freedom masses, take over the government, become pro-US, and everything was going to be okay. That they could work with the machinery that was there with a new leader, which is essentially what they've done in Venezuela. I mean, they complained that this was a narco-terrorist regime. They said it was a communist socialist regime, and yet they're working with it. They just decapitated the top, but now they're saying, "Oh, well, this is fine. We can work with this." And I think it's that success, at least that ostensible success. I don't think it's going to be a success. I think it's a tinderbox that can explode at any minute. Um, that, but I think it gave Trump the feeling like, if I can do this in Venezuela, I can do it over there in the Middle East.
You see, I think that what you're saying is reflected in the fact that Wyckoff is having these meetings with the Iranians, like in Geneva, and he made this public. I don't understand why they haven't given into our demands. They see we're building up this military force. They should realize that we can pummel them into dust. Why haven't they given up? See, the idea is that the Iranians said no, and said with all of their double talk in the negotiation language, we're not giving up our enrichment of uranium. We're not going to give up our ballistic missile system. We're not going to change our ideology. And they're aghast. But wait a minute. We have the biggest club on the planet. How could they? Well, we have to just hit them over the head a few times and that'll take care of it.
Yeah, but Richard, the real question is, from their standpoint, is what's wrong with doing this? This is a brutal dictatorship. Everybody agrees on that. And the idea is, okay, we go in there and we knock out this dictatorship. It's now no longer going to be a threat to Israel or the United States. It's designed to free the Iranian people, many of whom are celebrating this killing. Um, and I think that's one of the more difficult challenges that libertarians have had is why shouldn't this be the role of the U.S. government? Now, there's a lot of hypocrisy here because there's some dictatorships over there in the Middle East and elsewhere that the U.S. is fully supportive of. Egypt, military dictatorship, Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the regime that killed that journalist Khashoggi. These are brutal dictatorships, and the U.S. supports them. They partner with them. So this notion that, oh, well, it's only some dictatorships that we want to knock out, there's a lot of hypocrisy there. But I think that we need to challenge the whole paradigm of why should this be the role of the U.S. government, and what are the consequences of this? See, I think it's considered to be a cost-free endeavor, not financially. Everybody knows that this is costing a lot of money. They got to replace all these missiles and bombs and everything. There's your deficit soaring again, debasement of the currency, inflation, taxation, and so forth. But I think people give short shrift to the long-term consequences and short-term of the American people, ourselves, in addition to the financial and economic impact. I think that this ambiance of perpetual war, which is what we've lived under all our lives. I mean, there's the Cold War and there's the Korean War, Vietnam War, the war on terrorism. It's never ending. It's just like this. You're pummeled every day with crises and chaos, and then there's the war on immigrants, and then the war on drugs, and it's just constant chaos, whether it's Trump in there or not, Biden, Clinton, what have you. And it's become normalized. Not to mention the off-kilter killings that take place periodically in American society, and I think they're rooted in this violence that it adheres to the U.S. government and the national security state. And I think that our American ancestors had it right. Don't send the government in search of monsters to destroy. Lots of monsters. There's a lot. You can always find some brutal dictatorship. Don't do that. Instead, open America up to people that want to flee that dictatorship, that are able to escape. Send the message out. We're not going to come and save you by bombing you or bombing your family members, because there's a lot of people that are going to die in this Iranian thing, and they don't get the benefits. Let's say you're right that this is a big success. You got a free society, democratic society, the same kind of society that the U.S. government destroyed in 1953 with its coup. uh, the dead people that they killed, that the U.S. government killed, the Israeli government killed, they're not experiencing the joys of this new system. So where is the morality in that? Say, well, we sacrificed them for the greater good of the nation. Well, what gives you that moral authority to be killing people for the greater good of their nation? This is something that should be resolved internally within a government. Jefferson pointed this out in the Declaration of Independence. People put up with a lot of tyranny before they finally revolt because the costs of revolution are so high in terms of death and destruction. Here in the United States, I disagree with a lot of the policies of the U.S. government. I disagree with the whole welfare state, the warfare state, the drug war, the war on immigrants, and so forth. But I don't want some foreign regime coming in here and bombing my nation in order to change it. You know, I'd rather just sit here and argue and try to persuade people or really find people that are attracted to our philosophy, the libertarian philosophy, and change a nation that way, but rather than through force of arms. And this is what Adams was saying. We won't come and save you with force of arms, but if you want to get out and come to America, we will not deport you. Contrary to what happens today, they immediately will deport somebody. But back then it was you come to America, you make it, we won't help you out, root hog or die, but at least we won't deport you. That to me is a beautiful system. It's a peaceful system. It's a harmonious system. And it produces a free society, a prosperous society, a harmonious society, one that's not besieged by this constant crisis and chaos.
Well, I think part of the problem is the old one that Frederick Bastiat often mentioned and made a keystone of much of his criticisms and ridicule and satire about government, and that is what is seen and what is unseen. What is seen is that there's a terrible dictator somewhere in the world. People are being crushed by him, brutalized by him. Uh, People have no future. They can't say what they want, write what they want. They have no freedom of movement to even leave the country often if they wanted to. That's all that's seen. And what is also seen is that if we take some military and accompanying diplomatic and political action, we can either reduce the brutality or overthrow it by, as they call it now, nation building and regime change. What is unseen? What is unseen is what it affects in the United States. Are there not more costs that have to be incurred financially? Isn't there the increased debt that involves a burden of future taxes? Isn't that once the US government follows this road and is not only searching for monsters in other parts of the world to slay, but the monsters then viewing us the enemy attempt to threaten us, either directly or surreptitiously through terrorist attacks and other things, cyber attacks and so on. So what then falls upon the responsibility of the government in the face of these threats caused by its own interventions abroad that arouse the ire of these people? Now the United States has to have a homeland security. They have to be able to surveil, investigate, intrude, control, all of these forms. You have people, Trump talks about, all these immigrants coming in, they're all murderers and drug traffickers, et cetera, thieves. But you often hear, well, you can't let an open border. What if the agents of foreign countries come in to perform, bad terrorist attacks against America? So what becomes one version of this? Well, Trump now says that he's floating the idea through an executive order that every bank that has an existing or will be opening an account for any possible client, well, that client will have to demonstrate, existing or new, that they're a citizen of the United States. Where are your papers? This is like the Gestapo. We want to see your papers. Are they in order? We need to know where you live. We're watching you. This idea of cryptocurrency, government-run cryptocurrencies. No more cash transactions. Why? Transactions could occur through drug dealers, but also terrorist cells. We have to know every dollar and every penny of every dollar, where it's flowing, who has spent it, who has received it, what it's been used for, on and on and on. So basically, we are enveloped in the increasingly a near surveillance security state that approaches totalitarian knowledge of what we do, when we do, how we do, with whom we do, and why we do it. What happens to the idea of that individual liberty involves a degree of telling others as well as the government, it's none of your business. Leave me alone. What I do that is not obviously a direct harm to another through force or its use or its threat is none of your business. Or as Herbert Spencer brilliantly called it in one of the chapters in the book Social Statics, the right to ignore the state. If you cannot demonstrate that I have killed someone, robbed someone, or defrauded someone, you should not be concerned with me, and I don't have to pay attention to you. I can ignore the state. How does anyone ignore the state once you have this global empire in which enemies are everywhere, and it then becomes their duty to know everything going on to supposedly protect the homeland?
Yeah, yeah, it's really good point that this is often lost on people that they oftentimes produce the crisis that they then use as a justification for taking away our liberty.
Yes.
And sanctions are a perfect example of this. I mean, sanctions are a form of warfare. They're a warfare against the citizenry of a foreign country. The idea is you put sanctions on there to create economic privation, starvation, and the citizens will rise up. This is what the sanctions against Iran were all about. The citizenry will rise up and oust this regime, and then Trump's doing that right now, with the bombing campaign. Rise up. This is your opportunity, he's telling them. But in the process of doing that, it creates a lot of anger. And so on the 9/11 attacks, okay, I know that there are those that say this was an inside job on the part of the CIA and so forth, but setting aside that position and just taking the government at its word that this was a foreign attack, they had to come up with this idea that they attacked out of the clear blue just because they hate us for our freedom and values. Because they couldn't have Americans thinking the truth that they retaliated because of what the US government was doing to people overseas, especially in Iraq with the sanctions. And I'm reminded of what Madeleine Albright, who was US ambassador to the United Nations, said when 60 Minutes asked her, are the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children really worth this regime change you're trying to get? And she says, yeah. Now, Richard, I don't know if it was 500,000 Iraqi children. I know there's a lot of people that were dying over there from the sanctions, but she didn't question the number, and no official in the U.S. government condemned her or criticized her because that was the official mindset. Well, when there was so much anger over this that it motivated not only the 9/11 attacks, but 10 years before, or 8 years before, the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. When they caught one of the guys there and brought him before sentencing, he made no bones about it. He says, you call me a terrorist, but you are the real terrorists. You're the butchers. Look what you're doing with Iraq. Look what you're doing with Cuba, targeting innocent people as a way to get a political change. So they create the crisis. Look with Venezuela. They have sanctions against Venezuela for years and years, which they knew in combination with this socialist system would create horrible economic privation. But they're willing to do that because they wanted the Venezuelan people to rise up. And so what if tens of thousands of them are killed? At least they're not American, so who cares? So 8 million flee, many of whom come to the United States and they're treated like horse dung. Oh, invaders, tattooed gang members. Oh, they're going to get me, Jacob. They're going to get me. And so you have this massive deportation campaign to Venezuela where they're going to die. That's why they fled. Or to El Salvador where they can be incarcerated and tortured for doing what? For trying to save their lives? And so this is what Americans just don't want to confront, that the policies they favor and the system they favor is the very cause of the destruction of their own liberty here. You get the Patriot Act. You get the telecom secret surveillance schemes. You get the ICE raids. You get the murders of American citizens who are doing nothing more than protesting. In other words, you get this totalitarian-like system because the US government and its interventionism has produced the rationales and justifications for the destruction of liberty at home, not to mention the financial destruction with out of control federal spending.
And of course, those are all those unseen. All you saw at the beginning was liberating a people or freeing this or opposing some opponent, but you don't see all of the slow developing incremental policy by incremental policy at home in response to what we've done to abroad that is slowly eroding and weakening and loosening every freedom we take for granted. There was a time when you could enter an airport and not go through any type of security. No x-raying, no putting your bags through a machine, no being told to raise your hand and have your body frisked. There was a time when you could go onto the roof of the airport and through a coin telescope watch the planes arrive and take off. But no, you can't do that. The state tells you you have to be checked out. You have to be x-rayed. You have to be scanned. You have to have your bags opened and rummaged through. You have to justify where you're traveling and why you're traveling or why you've come back. And freedom has been lost. But it's like these little bits at a time. It's like that analogy, if you throw the frog into the boiling water, he'll jump out. But if you put him in while the water's cold and you slightly raise the temperature until it's boiling, you end up killing him and he never resists. That is what's most damaging about it. What is seen is the great thing. Oh, victory, our flags, we're doing the right thing. What is unseen is all the chain of events that follow it, but only over time in little increments that cumulatively, when if you look back, if you choose to, you end up seeing it as eroded the liberty, the freedom, and the principles upon which the country was founded.
Yeah, well, let me do some recommending for people. I mean, we've got some longtime supporters that tune in on our programs, but I think it's really good to put things in a big overall context too, as compared to just understanding the reasons why this particular intervention against Iran is bad and or the one against Venezuela. And that means going back to our book, Richard, in the 1990s, The Failure of America's Foreign Wars. I mean, if I think it's important to understand the overall context of foreign interventions. There it is. World War One, World War Two, the Spanish-American War, why these Vietnam, why these were so destructive, why it was the wrong thing to do. The revisionist case for not entering World War One and the consequences of World War Two. I mean, that's what I would recommend. I also would recommend all of Stephen Kinzer's books. Kinzer is professor at Boston College, columnist for the Boston Globe, fantastic writer, but he's got a multiple series of books on foreign interventionism. I'd recommend them all. Chalmers Johnson, he's now deceased, but Chalmers Johnson's trilogy on the empire of the United States empire is just absolutely fantastic. This is what I would recommend to people. And I also would like to recommend my new series, The Evil Within, where I show that these evil systems, and the first two are the national security state, the drug war. The third one is going to be on foreign interventionism, were no part of America's governmental system for the first 100 years, which shows that these are evil systems that have been grafted on to the original governmental system. And that if we're ever going to get America back on the right track, you've got to get rid of these malignant, cancerous systems. It's what de Tocqueville said when he came over to America in the 1800s. He said, America is great because America is good. When America ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. Well, these cancerous systems have caused America to not be good, Richard, which means America will never be great as long as we maintain them.
Yes. And if I can just highlight, uh, I know time is a scarce resource. People have their work, their families, their friends, just wanting to enjoy downtime. But sometimes you need to try to find a little bit of time to do a little bit of homework to understand why things are the way they are. And I really would recommend, besides what Jacob has just said about Johnson's book, this book that the Future Freedom Foundation published back in 1995. It's an oldie, but I can assure you a goodie. which recounts the consequences of, the reasons for, and the dangerous results of these foreign wars that America has fought throughout the 20th century. The Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the way to the, the first war on Iraq when this book was published. That is George H.W. Bush's war. And to understand that things do not happen in a vacuum, that the ideas and the policies and the special interests that have created these situations have emerged and solidified and taken power over these decades. The events of today are not an accident or unique. They're the latest links in a long chain of what has perverted the ideas, the ideology, the freedom, and the institutions of America from the vision, as Jacob was saying, of the founding fathers. So if you can, please take a little time to read, peruse, read some of the chapters and essays in a book like ours, The Failure of America's Foreign Wars. I would highly recommend it and suggest that it would be very useful to have what Ayn Rand used to refer to as intellectual ammunition against the opponents of freedom.
Yeah, and we're not called upon to save the world. That's not our job. The world's in pretty good hands as far as I'm concerned, with God. But we are called upon to speak the truth and to stand for what's right. And regardless of the consequences, you just got to stand for what's right against the wrongdoing, especially of one's own government. It's always easy to point out the tyranny overseas of foreign regimes. Not quite so easy to take a stand against your own government, but that's what we're really called upon to do. And also, one never knows what the future holds. Right around the corner, things can turn on a dime. But the only way they can turn on the dime is because sound ideas have found their way into enough people's minds that all of a sudden a paradigm shift takes place. So on that note, Richard, we'll wrap things up. As always, enjoyed the conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and thank you again for your great support of FFF.
Until next time.